Vitamin Water Zero Sugar has great taste, zero BS, and obviously, zero sugar. For those with zero room in their calendar. Zero patience for slow walkers. Those who get 0 hours of sleep on a Saturday night. Have zero filter, zero given, and zero interest in grabbing a plain, boring water. Grab a delicious Vitamin Water Zero Sugar today.
Welcome back to Disney Dish. It is me, entertainment writer Jim Hill, and I know. This is the part of this weekly podcast where you typically hear Mr. Testa. But Len's not with us this week. To be honest, I'm not sure where Mr. Testa is right now. Just to be clear here, I am not suggesting that Len's absence this week has anything to do with that recent robbery at Disney Springs. All right, so okay. Len did recently quiz me about extradition treaties, and as he was headed out of town, Mr. Testa did ask me if I'd mind returning some scuba equipment that he'd rented, but this is entirely circumstantial evidence, folks. I mean, something that I seriously doubt would ever stand up in any court of law. Though that said, before I say anything more, I should probably confer with Chris Cox, that magician and mind reader who is Len, my co-host on The Case Forward with Chris Cox. A brand new podcast takes a somewhat judicious look at the Disney parks. Please check out that podcast if you get the chance. And well, anyway, while Len's evading the long arm of the law, just kidding, or am I? I've decided it will take two men to fill in for Mr. Testa, and those two men are Laurel and Hardy. No, just kidding again. First up is my able-bodied co-host of Disney Unpacked. That's a video series that Mr. Testa and I do over on Patreon. Please welcome veteran Imagineer Jim Shull.
I want to know, Jim Hill, who gets the mustache? I had one. My wife never let me forget that. It was not a good look.
That's the irony, is I can do some facial hair, not a whole lot. And, I have not male pattern baldness. I just have baldness. So, anywhere I can get hair to grow, I'm a happy guy. Speaking of Mr. Shull, though, he has his own video series over on YouTube. It's called Disney Journey, which is where every week Mr. Shull posts all sorts of fascinating tales related to the more than 30 years he spent working at Walt Disney Imagineering. Also joining us today is Eric Hersey, who produces a lot of the shows here at Jim Hill Media. Eric's also my co-host on the Epic Universal podcast. And given that Mr. Shull has a Universal Hollywood-related story to share with this week's Disney Dish, I wanted Mr. Hersey to sit in. So, okay, folks, we have a lot of news to discuss this week. But before we do that, I want to be sure and mention the show's sponsor, and that is unlockmagic.com, where you can get real discounts on Walt Disney World and Universal Orlando tickets, sometimes upwards of 12% off. And just so you know, Unlock Magic is run by the exact same team behind the DVC rental store and the DVC resale market. So you can just pick your dates and grab your tickets for after-hours events like Halloween Horror Nights at Universal. By the way, if you were thinking about doing Mickey's Not So Scary this year, you're too late. That hard ticket event is completely sold out for 2025. Which is why, if you're thinking of doing Mickey's Very Merry this year, you better get a move on. 3 dates for that after-hours holiday event, which is held on select nights, November 7th through December 21st, are already sold out. On the other hand, there appear to be plenty of tickets available for this year's edition of Jollywood Nights, held at Hollywood Studios, November 8th through December 22nd. Anyway, unlockmagic.com. Get your tickets there and tell them, well, this time around, it was the two Jims and Eric who sent you. So, also, want to take a moment here to pay tribute to our subscribers, to be specific, Ed, Jill, and Krista, not to mention Sarah Ford, Tyler Davenport, and Ken Aubrey. These very kind folks, well, okay, remember how It's Tough to Be a Bug closed at Disney's Animal Kingdom earlier this year, March 25th to be exact. Well, if you remember, and the whole point was that theater at the base of the Tree of Life would then be retooled for brand new shows, Zootopia, Zoo Better Together. By the way, still supposedly on track for a November 7th opening. So we're just 5.5 weeks out now from getting to see that attraction. Well, anyway, back to It's Tough to Be a Bug. How many of you remember those giant Black Widow spiders that used to bungee down, over the audience as part of that show? Well, once that show closed, those enormous arachnids needed to be rehomed. And Ed, Jill, Sarah, Tyler, Krista, and Ken, being the kind souls that they are, were quick to volunteer. And it's now been 6 months since that attraction closed. And I thought you folks might like hearing about how those giant spiders have been adjusting to civilian life. And to be honest, from what I've been told, these 8-leg performers miss the glamour of show business. So 2 of them have recently taken up seasonal positions over at Universal. They're now terrifying tourists at this year's Halloween Horror Nights. To be honest, I'm not sure which maze they're working in. As for the other 4, Disney now has them working on third shift over at the Magic Kingdom. Their primary duty is providing the Haunted Mansion with lots of fresh cobwebs. So there you go. Anyway, on with this week's news. And this time around, gentlemen, I thought we would start on the West Coast, where Napa Rose at the Grand Californian Resort and Spa, which closed back in April of this year, April 24th to be exact, is undergoing an extensive refurbishment of both its indoor and outdoor dining spaces. Quick question, have either of you two eaten at Napa Rose before? Or?
Well, I've had that great pleasure of eating there several times. It is a fantastic location, great, wine selection, and a beautiful location because I think there are a lot of people who are unaware of it because, the Grand Flow in Florida is always the big hotel and the big restaurant. But the one in Anaheim, I would say I would nudge it above the one in Florida. It's just a beautiful location and you get a great meal. So yes, and yes.
Yeah. And Eric, any experience with this one or?
No, we've only gone to the West Coast twice, and part of that was D23 with you 2 guys, and you guys no one wanted to take me. I said let's go, and nobody wanted to cover my bill.
Hey,
I guess. So maybe next time.
To be fair, I did. We did take you to In-N-Out and Knott's. We took you to Knott's.
Right. We did the things.
Okay. Well. Anyway, Napa Rose, and Mr. Shull is not wrong. Spectacular location, has often been recognized for excellence. It's gotten multiple AAA 4 Diamond Awards, likewise recognition for Forbes Travel and Zagat's. And it was supposed to reopen this fall. However, that seems to have now been pushed out to spring of 2026. And speaking of things that are happening in 2026, and if you're not a wine connoisseur, if your idea of fine dining is, well, first pulling on your Star Trek uniform and then dropping by 10 forward to get a big pile of targ legs and then, finishing the meal off with a handful of Vulcan fritters, I am pleased to report that Universal FanFest Nights, which premiered this past spring at Universal Studios Hollywood, is not only coming back in 2026, but pre-sale tickets for this after-hours event will be getting underway shortly. Now, guys, the dates for this year's edition of the Universal FanFest Nights pretty much line up with last year's after-hours hard ticket. That was held on select nights between April 26th and May 18th this year, in 2026. It's going to be held April 23rd through May 16th. And I think you all probably saw, some of the footage of the amazing, like Halloween Horror Night walkthroughs. The Star Trek one was evident. pretty good. The outdoor thing that they did down in Courthouse Square is a celebration of Back to the Future. It looks like they're going to try to do something on that scale with this, the 2026 edition. All they've revealed so far is it's going to be a mashup of the Universal Classic monsters and and the characters from Scooby-Doo. So I could, this time around, those meddling teens may be in over their head, though. Oh, by the way, if you want a little swag, if you buy a pre-sale ticket to the 2026 edition of the Universal FanFest Nights, Universal will gift you a complimentary limited edition collectible medallion. And I was thinking, Eric, that I should mention this to your lovely bride, Lauren, so she and I can talk about it in our I Want That Too podcast, the one about merch.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, Jim, because this is interesting. Scooby-Doo. So have you guys paid any attention to the Volcano Nights or Volcano Bay Nights? Have you seen that the Scooby-Doo characters have kind of invaded that over it down in Florida?
This is the after hours thing that's being done at the water park down in Florida right now, right?
Right. Yeah. So the Mystery Machine and so forth has been showing up there, and they've kind of been running around at that after event. So I'm wondering if that had positive reaction to that go full forward with the Scooby-Doo here in Hollywood, because it seems pretty interesting. And obviously we know the monsters have huge impact right now down in Florida.
They do.
But the question I would have is it's kind of a mixture of style, because really cartoony Scooby-Doo versus like Universal monsters are really super realistic. Do you think that they're going to kind of cartoonify the monsters here? Are we going to get more cartoon versions, or what's your thought?
Well, here's a thought on that topic. The reality is, the monsters are actually very horrific. I mean, they're tragic characters, but they're a little bit scary, a little too scary for some children. Whereas Scooby-Doo is a way into that world that's a lot more family friendly. So it may be a way of, Universal having their cake and eating it too.
No, that's an excellent suggestion. But again, if you're as old as myself and Mr. Shull are, you remember, there have been so many different iterations of Scooby-Doo over the years, but I want to say it might have been the second edition of the show after the original Scooby-Doo Where Are You show was launched. The CBS had what they called the new Scooby-Doo movies, where each week, seriously, the Scooby-Doo characters would encounter a different set of celebrities. I mean, and I want to say they solved mysteries with the Harlem Globetrotters.
I was going to say, I feel like I've seen the Harlem Globetrotters before.
There we go. Also the Addams Family, the Three Stooges, Dick Van Dyke, Jonathan Winters. I mean, it was a very pop culture mix, only this, I want to say, was 70, 71.
But think about that, for a moment. Ask yourself, could you ever do that today? Because that list you just gave, a murderer's row of IP, they were being turned over for that program. I can't see that happening today.
Well, I mean, but at the same time, think about it. The trades have been full of stories just recently about, Paramount Skydance potentially buying Warner Brothers, and
it's rumored.
Yeah, so we may be not that far off from the Looney Tune characters, appearing on the deck of the Enterprise. But anyway, getting back.
But one other note I'll make on that is that Scooby-Doo has already been in theme parks and has been for decades. It's not Universal theme parks, but they've been proven that they can be rolled out. And so again, if I were a Universal, let's say, who is maybe possibly going to lose the Simpsons rights at some point, might they look in that direction to the Scooby-Doo characters? We don't know. But, again, at this point in time where we are today, all bets are off.
All true. Getting back to Florida now, though, and again, I know the folks in Florida, they don't have a Universal FanFest Nights event, not yet. Anyway, I mean, and not to belabor obvious, you did get an entire new theme park, just free. Epic Universe. So they keep the whining to a minimum. But also worth noting, though, and in fact, I think Eric, you and I talked about this on the show that there was a survey sent out to people who'd recently visited the Universal Orlando Resort that sort of felt them out about, hey, how would you guys feel about a FanFest night event? And more to the point, they gave them, a Chinese menu of IP to the effect of, okay, which 6 would you be interested in seeing if we did one of these down in Florida? Now, speaking of surveys, Mr. Shull and I are not at liberty to discuss how we actually got this info, but a survey related to popcorn bucket sales at Universal Studios Hollywood recently landed in our laps, and which offered up some very interesting insights into what might be going on in the future in Southern California in regards to sales of these now typically very elaborate containers. Now, just to be clear here, Disney sort of plowed the road when it came to taking this food snack container and turning it into a real line of business. And again, this survey that Mr. Shull and I managed to get our hands on suggests that Universal is about to follow Disney in a very big way into the souvenir popcorn bucket business. And do you want to share some of the questions we got, Jim?
Yeah, on the survey, there's some great questions about Universal's. Well, they're poking the bear to see what the market will bear. So among the questions they asked was, well, number one, do you want your popcorn loaded into your collectible container, or would you like to have a pristine container, but you still want your popcorn? So we'll put your popcorn, your hot buttered snack, into a separate bag. So therefore, you get best of both worlds. You get to fill your mouth and keep your popcorn bucket pristine.
Which, again, suggests that they are seriously eyeballing the collector market. Now, that said, there was a fascinating follow-up question because think about it. You've now purchased your container and you've spent big bucks on this popcorn bucket collectible.
Oh, Jim Hill, you're assuming they're only purchasing a single popcorn bucket. Now, as we know from Disney, I mean, we've all seen the photographs, we've seen the videos online when there's a new popcorn bucket and someone swoops in for the resale market and they go in to say, hey, I'm going to go fill both of these suitcases with your popcorn bucket. I'm going to the resale store. So Universal is thinking, well, what if we sell all these popcorn buckets? Where do people store them when they're on the rides? Because the storage lockers that are built are for personal items, your phone, your keys, maybe a little fanny pack, not for a suitcase full of very big, massive popcorn buckets. So they asked this question. The question was, do you have trouble storing your collectible popcorn bucket that you bought here in one of our ride storage lockers?
Yeah, and that's honestly a thing that the last couple times I've went to Universal, because it's a different vibe. Even when you buy those collectible or the cups, the refillable cups, which is a great value because you could fill it up in the Coke machines. But there's a lot of coasters, and you're not allowed to take anything. And it's one of those like, all right, what am I going to do if you're going and you have 2 cups? And like you don't want to sit them somewhere, if you don't have somewhere a stroller or somebody to hold them, you're kind of stuck along that. So I've been, the last time I went on Men in Black, I barely got like half of our stuff in that stock locker. So these popcorn buckets, I don't know what you're going to do with them. You can't take them on the rides.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what's intriguing here is sort of reading between the lines here. One wonders particularly if you're somebody who buys multiple popcorn buckets in your park, if the Universal team member isn't going to then be trained to hand you a card to say, hey, take this down to the front of the park. We have a temporary storage facility set up and you can collect this at the end of the day. Though that said, there's the other question I thought, Jim, that was fascinating, that was included in the survey that, again, Universal kind of taking the temperature of the room in regard to this line of business.
Yeah, because, you think about how serious this line of business is for Universal or Disney, because Universal asked another question. And the question is, did you make a special trip to the park just to purchase this collectible popcorn bucket? In other words, I'm sitting here in, I don't know, Southern California, Northern California, or somewhere in Alabama or some other state. And I put on my list of things to do. I'm driving to Orlando or to Hollywood because they have a special one-of-a-kind limited opportunity popcorn bucket. So I'm driving there to get that. I don't care about your Super Nintendo World. I want a popcorn bucket.
Well, but
is it made of gold, Jim? Shull? I mean, that's a long trip.
But again, got to think in terms of Disneyland,
right?
And Universal Studios Hollywood operating the same way. That it's a regional park, right. And so that means that somebody can be in, let's say, Bakersfield, California. If you're not familiar with Bakersfield, it's about you can make it in about 2.5 hours from Bakersfield to Hollywood. So it's a day trip. Yeah. And so if you're there to buy that bucket because you want it for yourself or the resale market, that's likely, that's very doable.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating for me, doing a little research ahead of today's show, and Universal already has a surprisingly sophisticated program when it comes to these collectible popcorn buckets. I want to say just on the last edition of Epic Universal Podcast, Eric, you brought up the Hamikuma, the scary teddy bear. Well, it turns out that for Halloween Horror Night this year out in Hollywood, they have 2 specific collectible popcorn buckets. One of them is a Hamikuma, a base one, and the other one, oh God, I swear to God, this is real. It's Hello Kitty meets Chucky. So, in a cute little collectible, Jeep. But likewise, I think Mr. Shull just mentioned Super Nintendo World. There are land specific popcorn buckets. They have the Mario Kart car, the light up superstar. Likewise, if you go over to the Wizarding World, they have the Butterbeer wagon popcorn cut. And then just, tangentially to this, they have popcorn buckets at the parks that key off of recent a Universal Picture releases to theaters. There was one just this summer of Toothless in an Egg. Likewise, there was a cute little Jurassic World T-Rex one. Though we were just talking about the lockers and fitting these, these souvenir popcorn buckets in these things that were just not built for them. And evidently, the thing that set this survey in motion was that 60th anniversary Glamour Tram popcorn bucket, the one that's being driven by Woody Woodpecker, and it's the size of a Winnebago, and it was just. And that was the thing. People were, so thrilled to buy it, and then would go to try to route a coaster, and it's like, we have no place to store that. I am so sorry, but you're going to have to figure this out. That's it. We were just talking about the Wizarding World, and the other part of this survey, which Mr. Shull, if you care to share.
Yeah, indeed. It's not just the popcorn buckets, but now it's the flavor popcorn that you put in your bucket. Now, obviously, some of these are not to everyone's taste. But if you really want to, the survey talked about, how about green cheese for the Grinchmas? You kind of think about that. I mean, I love the Grinch. Everyone loves the Grinch, but I don't know what flavor green cheese calls to mind.
I do not.
I think it was stinky.
I'll tell you what, I am creating a new secondary business though, where I just have wet naps and wipes, and I'm going to stand around once they're done, because I just imagine you don't necessarily want green hands afterwards, but we'll see.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I love Cheetos. True. Everyone loves Cheetos, crunchy Cheetos especially. And, I'll go through and consume an entire bag and end up going home with the evidence on my hands. Yeah. Like my wife will say, "Oh, I know where you been and what you've eaten." So I ate green cheese.
Okay. But now we also learned about some special popcorns that might be coming to the Wizarding World. Can you share those flavors?
Yeah, well, we all know that, when you're downing a beautiful butterbeer, you need something to pair with that. So what Universal's talking about providing for you is a chocolate frog and butterbeer flavored popcorn.
I've had both. Now the good news is the chocolate frog.
Yeah.
Yes, they sell chocolate frogs.
Okay.
They were like hard, like solid chocolate, and I tried to take a bite, and they're pretty solid.
They're
So
dense.
the good news is I didn't taste any frog. So I think that might just be chocolate drizzled, which I absolutely love something like that. And butterbeer, we know my obsession with butterbeer.
But that's the thing for me. The notion that universal, what do we have? Hot butterbeer, cold butterbeer, butterbeer ice cream, butterbeer fudge. We just with Epic Universe got the butterbeer crepes, and that somewhere looming in the background and is now butterbeer popcorn, and it's just sort of like. I just felt so bad for you, Eric. I figured, that Miles's college fund is now in real jeopardy.
No, but that's how I'm getting the money back from selling the wet wipes for the green hand. So we're good.
There we go.
We're actually funding that.
Okay.
So. But this isn't. But even to Disney, Jim Shull, they have at Epcot. I know there's a stand that has like 6 different types of popcorns, and there's like orange popcorn and different stuff like that. So it's not completely unique to have these different styles of popcorns, right?
Oh, absolutely not. And if you ever make the trip over to Tokyo Disneyland Resort, they're the pioneers in very odd, strange popcorn flavors. Strange to a Westerner, but not to the local Japanese tourists, because they'll have, you spin the dial, and if they can put it on popcorn, that flavor will appear somewhere. And people go crazy for them because they're not always long-term flavors. They'll be just for a very brief amount of time. And again, you don't go to the park just to ride the rides. Now you go to taste the flavors that are there only for a while. You're going by the popcorn bucket that's only there for a while. That exclusivity and calendar change out is something that's become a real strong line of business. And, it's not just, going to that old popcorn stand anymore. It's, it's now you gotta have the whole experience.
All true.
So it would work really well for a regional theme park, you're saying?
Well, it works for the parks because this is definitely a line of business. If you go back to Google Earth and you look at Disneyland behind the Haunted Mansion, you'll see a large warehouse. That's just outdoor vending. Purely, that's only for all the little carts that you see scattered around the park.
Wow.
So, and again, this is something where when they built those lockers at Universal for the Mummy ride, those were only for your fanny packs and your cell phones. They were never built for, storing massive amounts
Woody Woodpecker?
of popcorn.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Woody Woodpecker and his Winnebago.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, all right, folks. So that's the news from the West Coast. And when we get back from this break, we'll pick up with what's going on theme parks on the East Coast. But first, this.
This episode is brought to you by 20th Century Studios' new film, Springsteen, Deliver Me From Nowhere, starring Golden Globe winner Jeremy Allen White and Academy Award nominee Jeremy Strong. Scott Cooper, the director of the Academy Award-winning movie Crazy Heart, brings you the story of the most pivotal chapter in the life of an icon. Springsteen, Deliver Me From Nowhere. Only in theaters October 24th.
This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Healthcare professionals can lead their careers with LinkedIn. Discover jobs by specialty, preferred shifts, and even desired salary. From mental health therapists to radiology technicians, it's now faster and easier for healthcare professionals to find the right fit. Learn more at linkedin.com/healthcare. Side effects may include faster job placement, improved work-life balance, and increased career satisfaction.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
And we're back. And here, guys, here's something I didn't know, that hurricane season starts on June 1st and then runs through November 30th. And this year, the 2025 hurricane season, at least out in the Atlantic, has gotten off to a somewhat slow start. But that appears to be changing. What with Umberto just today officially making the jump from tropical storm to full-fledged hurricane, not to mention Tropical Storm Imelda, which is just behind Hurricane Umberto, both of them seemingly heading for the East Coast and potentially making landfall in Florida. Now, want to stress here, we are still dealing with the cone of uncertainty. I love that name. And by Monday, September 29th, when this podcast actually posts, we'll have a much better idea of the path that Umberto and Imelda are following, and where and when they possibly might make landfall. But even a glancing blow, all that wind, all that rain can have a huge impact on the parks down in Florida. And I bring that up because, did you guys see this rain event that happened in Central Florida on the 23rd last week? It was evidently significant enough that it disrupted operations at Hollywood Studios, with Tower of Terror, Rise of the Resistance, and Smuggler's Run all going down for a period of time due to power fluctuations. And Mr. Shull, I have to admit, I was intrigued by what happened at the studio sister parks with rides that were seemingly clustered close together, like Space Mountain, Tron Lightcycle Run over the Magic Kingdom, and then the Seas with Nemo and Friends and Journey into Imagination with Figment, also temporarily going down due to power fluctuations. And any thoughts on why that might have happened?
Well, I think the term you want to look for is infrastructure. A lot of the ride shows and attractions, the parks, vary. And so if you look at the oldest of the parks, which is Magic Kingdom in Florida, they have the oldest infrastructure.
Okay.
But when you turn your attention over to Epcot, when they added the soaring rides, the first two theaters and later came back with the third theater, they, kind of beefed up the infrastructure. And so that starts to say to me that not every pavilion there in Epcot is created equally.
Interesting that you bring that up, because what's fascinating, at least to me, if we double back to Epcot here, is, again, we've got Journey into Imagination with Figment and the Living Seas with Nemo and Friends being affected by these power fluctuations. But there's actually a pavilion in the middle there between the two of them on over in World Nature, the land that evidently just motored on.
Mother Nature knows better, Jim. That's the thing. That you don't mess with living with the land. Don't you know that is untouchable?
Okay. That said, one of my favorite, somewhat obscene Disney theme park stories has to do with a lightning strike on that building. And when the power went down and Bonnie Appetit, I believe let's not. This is a family show. We won't tell that story. But yeah,
no, do not.
Okay.
It's like Bonnie Appetit is still well loved.
There we go.
Let's and her reputation is almost restored. So let's leave her to rest.
Moving on. Okay, back to Hollywood Studios now. Star Wars Launch Bay at that theme park went down seemingly forever. In fact, a day after this rain event, September 24th, and then by the morning of September 25th, the construction fences were now up for the reimagining of the studio's animation courtyard.
Oh, and Jim, to interrupt, if you go and look at the digital online maps for that park, the animation courtyard had been erased. Now, what's always interesting to me, I love about Disney, is when they erase something, they don't play honest, because suddenly where there used to be animation courtyard, there's a forest.
Right.
And over where Muppets Vision is, there's another forest. It's like, I was there. Last time I was there was concrete, a little asphalt, maybe a planter or two. But forest, I don't think so. But if you look at the map, they have a forest now.
Yeah, I get, and for me, again, I'm old enough that I remember, there were the photos of from Stalin's era of being in charge of Russia, and it was always fascinating to look at the photographs where it was all these people standing together at the Politburo, and then you'd get another version of that photograph, and five guys had somehow disappeared over the years. Go figure.
Well, it's kind of like this story with Walt and his cigarette.
Oh,
there'd be always the photographs of Walt,
Mhm.
and he, that was not him doing the V for victory sign.
There we go.
That was back in the day where there was pre-digital. Somebody dot etched and photoshopped, pre-photoshopped, airbrushed out what Walt was holding between his two fingers. It wasn't a piece of chocolate or a piece of popcorn. Maybe a little Lucky Strike, but there's precedent for all of that.
All true. Now, getting back to the work that is now underway at the studio in regard to the Magic of Disney Animation project, what's kind of interesting about the construction fences that are up right now are they allow access to, The Little Mermaid, a musical adventure, the redo of that show. They also make it easy for guests to get down to Walt Disney Presents, but the rest of the area is behind construction fences with one noted exception, which is the studio archway. And Jim Shull, you previously explained to me the significance of that. That's kind of the point where when this project first opened in May of '89, you left the theme park per se and entered the production facility, right?
Yeah, indeed, because the history behind the original Disney MGM Studios design was unlike Universal. You weren't stepping through the front gate into a studio, working studio. You were stepping into the Hollywood of the 1920s, 1930s, and you'd go down Hollywood Boulevard toward the Grauman's Chinese. Once you got to the middle, when you're standing on Mickey's face, then you turn to the right and you'd go through the archway, which signified now you were leaving Hollywood and going into the Disney MGM Studios. Now, what's fascinating to me about that was, and I really hope they keep some of the carvings on that arch because they were gorgeous.
Oh, no, the bas relief, it was amazing.
Yeah, it was just amazing stuff. So I hope, fingers crossed, that they find a place in the park for the bas relief and that they don't end up in some executive's office. But having said that, it got repainted. It's got a new name over the years. And, it was the gateway where people are going to find out on that 2-hour tour of the park backlot where movies were made and TV shows were made and animation and cartoons were all made. But we're about to lose the arch, it seems.
Yeah, that in fact the concept art that was shared when this project was officially renounced basically showed, well, anybody who's actually been out to California to the Really for Real Disney Studios in Burbank, if you drive onto the lot from Buena Vista Street, you basically pass the sign that they're going to recreate there. That's going to be the placemaking, so to speak. And then what's kind of interesting is it's a Reader's Digest version of the going to the Burbank lot. I mean, the idea is that once you get past that sign, you're now on the very college campusy feeling lot, and then toward the back where, again, Star Wars Launch Bay has been for the past, 10 or so years, you're now going to get a new facade that looks like the Roy E. Disney Feature Animation Building, which, by the way, is on the other side it's not on the lot. It's on the other side of the street.
It's on the other side of Riverside Drive.
Yeah.
And where that building is located was the original home for Walt Disney's Little Family Fun Park. When you go there to either the ABC building or to Disney Feature Animation, you're standing on sacred ground because it could have been the Disneyland.
Could have been.
Now, one other thing, if there's any justice in the world, one of the elements they're going to bring over from Burbank is, in the Burbank lot, there at the corner of Dopey and Mickey, there's a drain. And right next to that drain, there's a fire plug, fire hydrant.
Okay.
And so the clever people at the studios, well, they took a little, so shall we say, artistic license. And so, given the fact there's a fire hydrant, they did a little playful nod to Mickey's, loyal dog.
Yes. Is it? I forget what it's actually called. It's Pluto's Corner. Is that what it's called?
Yeah. It which is a polite way of saying, well, there's corner and there's his place.
There we go. Okay. So I just putting this out there now, folks, just because that is there doesn't mean, what's the euphemism here? You're not allowed to mark your territory. No. Okay. Let's just put that out there. All right, moving on now. Speaking of other things that are being worked on in 2026, we just got news about when the Skyliner will be going down for its annual maintenance, and we have specific dates for that, January 25th through the 31st, and what's kind of interesting about this, and again, I wish we had Len on this particular episode to talk about this, because face it, that's a week when, if you're staying at the Art of Animation or Pop Century or the Riviera or Caribbean Beach Resort, one of the main perks of staying there goes away. So what's interesting is Disney deliberately puts this info out, way in advance, with the notion of, there are people who are obviously traveling great distance and saving for a lot of time for their Disney World vacation, and the notion of, we're going to be at the resort with the Skyliner. And it's like, well, you just want to be sure that we let these people know well in advance that the week you're here, that's not going to be running. So if you want to change your accommodations, do so in advance. And Disney takes this so seriously. In fact, what's especially fascinating about this bit of news breaking is they didn't just share the dates for when the Skyliner will be down in 2026. They shared the dates for when the Skyliner is going to be down in 2027. And I want to say that's, January 24th through the 30th of 2027. And you're familiar with this transportation system, Mr. Shull. I mean, what do they typically do? I mean, it's only down for like 5 days or thereabouts.
Well, it would give them the time to do an inspection. You're going to look at the drive motors. You're going to look at the cable. You're going to be going into the maintenance bay. Basically that sort of thing. It's not so much a time that you go to make repairs, but you're looking to make repairs if you need to. So it's more, an inspection report, and a week is not a lot of time, but it's enough time because it is a big route, and I've taken it a couple of times, and I find it quick, efficient, and a lot of fun. And honestly, it would kind of move the needle for me if I wanted to stay somewhere on property, and had an eye on my budget to stay either in the Art of Animation, Pop, Caribbean, or the Riviera, just simply because it's on the line.
There you go. There we go. Back now for a sec to Star Wars Launch Bay. And again, remember, with that closing this past week, one of the ripple effects of that is, of course, that, when you visited Launch Bay, they did offer meet and greets there with Chewbacca and Darth Vader. And Hollywood Studios still wants to continue to offer guest experiences with this character. So what's interesting is looking for at least temporary accommodations for these characters. I mean, for example, Darth Vader, at least for the foreseeable future, has now set up camp in the exterior queue of Star Tours The Adventures Continues. Now, but I've actually been told from friends who work in ops that, well, in a weird sort of way, to sort of dovetail back to Hurricane Umberto and Tropical Storm Imelda, it's like, yeah, having that expensive a costume outdoors, not a smart idea. Also, to be honest, you have to also think of the poor cast member who's inside of, think about it, plastic mask, heavy breastplate, is wearing that, that warm full-length cape and standing now in the direct sun, in Central Florida. It's like, that's not going to work. not for full time. So it's like, all right, we've got him there for now. Let's look for another spot around the park where we could potentially get him indoors and in some air conditioning. Chewbacca, on the other hand, they already have a spot that they love, and that's actually directly under the full-size Millennium Falcon outside of Smuggler's Run. And it's like, hey, he's out of the sun, and it's a great photo backdrop, and guests love to interact with him there. So, okay, let's double up on that. Oh, and as long as we're talking Star Wars, and remember, next spring, late spring, early summer, we're going to get a brand new ride film for Smuggler's Run that keys off of The Mandalorian and Grogu. And I bring up that upcoming Star Wars film, which arrives in theaters May 22nd of next year, because, well, folks, I'm sure you were aware of the whole Jimmy Kimmel situation this past week, and Disney was dealing with a tidal wave of bad publicity. And, but again, you're a major media company. You have tools that nobody else on the planet has when it comes to, how do we distract people from canceling, Disney Plus? And it's like, well, what you do is you put out your teaser trailer for The Mandalorian and Grogu. Did you see how in the middle of the whole Kimmel thing, suddenly that was put out there? And by the way, did either of you see the trailer?
I did. And I was very impressed because they went old school. I saw a lot of puppetry, which is a callback to the original first Star Wars movie. And so I think they're kind of pulling some of those child favorite levers from my past.
And you, Eric?
Yeah, I saw it. I mean, it was interesting. It just kind of came out of the blue. So it wasn't like at least I didn't see any press. So I caught it, I think, on YouTube after the fact when somebody was like, hey, it came out. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll watch that. So it's interesting. I'm not really sure where the story is going with it, but it was just like the best of hits. I saw an AT-AT being destroyed on the side of a mountain, so I'm in. So that sounds like a great thing to see. So
there we go. All right, folks. That brings us up to date. Everything that's gone down in Florida over the past week. But when we get back from this break, Mr. Shull is going to help us look back some 54 years to what it must have been like at the Walt Disney World Resort, some 72 hours before that place actually opened for business for the first time, October 1st, 1971. But first, this.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
When your investors, customers, and workers demand more from your business, make it happen with SAP. The AI-powered capabilities of SAP can help you streamline costs, connect with new suppliers, and manage payroll, even when your business is being pulled in different directions. To deliver a quality product at a fair price, while paying your people what they're worth too, so your business can stay unfazed. Learn more at sap.com/uncertainty.
This podcast is supported by FX's English Teacher. Last year's critically acclaimed series returns to follow Evan, Gwen, and Marky as they vie for their students' divided attention. See why Cosmopolitan called its premiere season a masterclass of comedy, while Glamour raved it's the year's funniest and most heartwarming new comedy series. FX's English Teacher, all new Thursdays on FX. All episodes now streaming on Hulu.
Okay, and we're back, folks. And look, as someone who's long written about and studied Disney theme park history, I've been lucky enough to talk to many of the folks who actually worked with Walt on the original Disneyland. I mean, for example, Ken Anderson, who was a veteran animator at the studio, but when Disneyland was getting ready to open in July of 1955, it was this all hands on deck situation. And people who worked at the studio, and often at Walt's own personal behest, drove on down to Anaheim, picked up a paintbrush or a hammer. They were doing whatever they had to get that place ready for its July 17th, the live broadcast, the big grand party. And so Ken had originally gone down to Disneyland to help Claude Coates with the painting of all of the black light elements in Snow White and Her Adventures. Likewise, Peter Pan flight. And these guys had already been at it for 24 hours straight when word came down that, oh, God, we need help over in Tomorrowland. We also have to get the 20,000 Leagues walkthrough ready. So Ken packs up his little plate of black light paint and heads on over there. But at this point, he is so exhausted that he starts to paint the giant squid, putting the little black light paint highlights on it, and he falls asleep. And a couple hours later, he finds himself tangled in this mechanical squid's tentacles. I mean, by the way, the mechanics that actually powered the thing in the movie from '54 had long since been stripped out. So these were tentacles filled with K-pop that were dangling from piano wire. So it wasn't a question of, Ken found himself being crushed by a mechanical squid. But again, silly story, but true. And again, the very same thing happened some 16 years later down in Florida, October 71. They're supposed to be shooting at the Contemporary Resort the TV special that will air on NBC that same month, the grand opening of Walt Disney World, 90-minute long special. But here's the thing, the hotel doesn't have a lawn yet. So Dick Nunes somehow gets a hold of 2 pallets of sod, but they don't arrive till like 9 o'clock at night, and they're shooting the next morning. And so what Dick first does is he has a bunch of cast members drive over to the hotel, and at the edge of the lawn, the parking lot that's around the lawn, everybody parks their cars and turns their headlights on. And then then Dick is standing in the middle of this group of people, and they're forming a line of people handing pieces of sod down to be slapped down onto the bare ground so that the next morning, it'll have a lawn. But the entire time, Dick, because he knows everybody's tired and stupid by this point, keeps chanting, "Green side up, green side up." But that, Mr. Shull, help me out here. That is actually fairly typical for 72 hours out from when a park opens. And in fact, you had very much a moment much like this when Disneyland Paris opened back in April of '92, right?
Indeed. The reality is when you start any project at Disney, you always assume, well, in 5 years, we're going to open it. But you kind of forget about that deadline, that opening date, because you're in the normal work. And finally that day comes and you're in the middle of the last checklist of things you have to do. I mean, like Ken Anderson, he probably did not paint the backside of the squid because you'll never see it. You focus your attention. You only put down the amount of grass that you need in front of the Contemporary because you got to get that portion of the Contemporary looking good for the cameras. You don't care about what is outside the camera. And so it is with Euro Disneyland. And when I was there, I was a very young Imagineer. And I remember with my little, my Peugeot that I'd rented at Charles de Gaulle Airport. And remember, I'd gone over for, 10 days. And suddenly it was 20 days and then 22 months and then 4 months. And I'd pack I'd left in fall, early fall in Southern California. And let me tell you, 4 months later in Mondeville, it's not warm. And I didn't pack appropriately. So basically, I'm wearing everything in my suitcase that didn't stink. And I'm driving around. And so checking in the morning, I'd be given my list of things to do. And so my little Peugeot was commandeered. And I was given different assignments. One morning, I was assigned flower duty. And so I drove my Peugeot and the yardsmen started to put everything they could, all the flats of flowers into my Peugeot. And this happened the entire week. And so I'm driving and I asked, well, where am I going to drive? Oh, that way, pointing down Main Street, USA. And so it's not just a place, listeners, for the parades to walk down or drive down. It's also a place for me to drive down my little Peugeot filled, and I mean filled, including the rooftop with flowers. And so I'm driving up and down Main Street, USA for the day and most of the week. And eventually my time was up because, you have to go home at some point. And so, I went to Charles de Gaulle with my little Peugeot. And, I go there and this little charming, wonderfully sweet young mademoiselle asked me, "Oh, how did you enjoy our car? Did you enjoy your time in France?" And I know what she's about to find when she does her inspection. So I sit there and I kind of, stand up and I have my business card out, like, "Disney, this'll get me out of anything." And she comes back in after doing her inspection. She looks at me with this expression I know she never had before with any customer. And she just looked at me and said, "Oh, I guess you had a good time. And please sign here on this inspection report." And I said, "Thank you very much for your time." And I'm thinking as I'm heading to the airport, I'll probably be blackballed from Eurocar as long as I live. But it gets better because I go back to Glendale, check in, and go to my functional manager. And I said, "Well, here's a heads up. You need to be aware that you're probably going to get a phone call from the people at Eurocar." And she looks at me, looks away, looks at me and says, "You're not the first." It's because when you open a theme park, it's not opening, it's a fire drill. It truly is, all hands on deck, whatever needs to be done in order to get that thing open, because, the guest doesn't care and they're about to walk in and all they care about is, "Oh, they're beautiful flowers." They never ask where they came from or what car was sacrificed to provide them.
Got it. Now, speaking of which, you mentioned early on, fall of 91, you get tapped to go over for, again, what you're told, a week, 2 weeks, that sort of thing. But can you talk about when you got sent there? Well, for example, where did you stay? I mean, what was life like as an Imagineer who, got sent to the field for 2 weeks and wound up staying for 22?
Well, they often, in my case, they put me in one of the local hotels and then they transfer me over to one of the new hotels. Now, when Euro Disneyland opened, it opened with a number of hotels, and I stayed in one of them which is a joy unto itself, because you're in a hotel that's not yet open to guests. Now, it's sort of, there's open and there's open and sort of open. And that's the area that I was, because I'd opened my door to leave in the morning and there's still plastic in the hallway, and I'd avoid the painters who are painting the ceiling and trying not to get wet, and ducking under the scaffold to go down the stairs because the elevator is not operational yet. Or if it is, they don't have the certificate. You get the picture. And I would walk out and, grab a pound of chocolate and a coffee and head out to the site. But the nice thing about it is that at least I was well dressed, because as we started to move into the cold season, of course, I had my hard hat, I had my heavy pants, and I had my PPE, which is personal protective equipment. And that would be, it'd be heavy safety glasses and a scarf. And basically, I'd wrap myself like a mummy because it's really cold out there. And as a result, it's funny how it goes that you get really good recognizing your best friends, your colleagues, by only looking at their eyes, because that's the only thing that was available for you to look at. Because even the hard hats, typically an Imagineering hard hat will have your name. But when you get to the panic portion of opening a theme park, you just have a long hallway of hard hats and you grab anyone's. So, I'd go out there with a hard hat, and someone one time at a meeting looked at me, looked at my hard hat, looked at me and said, "Bonjour, Nancy."
Now, you mentioned, again, the parks got to get open, and again, 5 years previously, people agreed on, when this was going to open. And what's always fascinating to me is this kind of this Disney tradition of, well, before the park opens, there's the party. And that's, I think, the thing that must have been especially scary, that there's like when the park has to open, but there, it still needs to be ready like 2 and 3 days before that because of all of the press stuff. So, that just must make crunch time even more crunchier, right?
Well, crunchy as in hard work, not in the good cereal that you get to eat in the mornings. Yeah, what you have is a turnover, an operational turnover and media turnover are happening concurrent with the WDI finishing it up tasks. And so as a result, again, you're trying to go in and do an install of that final prop or that final item that needs to go into a show, and you're having to basically tell the person who's setting up his camera and his lights and the director, you can't set up here because I'm still painting that wall that you're trying to light. Oh my God. And at one time we went ahead and, they were setting up, we were painting in the morning and took a lunch break, came back, and they'd set up all their cameras. And so we continued to paint. And then got a call the next morning from the director saying, we set up the lights on a wall that was a light beige. Oh. And now it's all painted in dark grays and mauve. This is not going to go. Could you please paint it back to that nice beige that we had before? No. We actually, if we could, which we won't, we're already down the street painting some other building that needs some tender love before we open this park. But the neat thing about it is, you don't paint alone, you paint with other people. So the very people that you spend all day with, you spend often, morning with at breakfast, lunch, cafe, after hours, cocktails, dinners, and you build some fantastic relationships. And the other thing that happens is you end up eating a lot off the truck, the food truck, especially in the case of the first park, because in Florida, before there was anything else, and you were building the group that was building the Magic Kingdom, they didn't have a restaurant to go to. And the same with Euro Disneyland. They drove down to work on very muddy roads. And I remember a couple of times driving into work there at Euro Disneyland and seeing a car in the ditch because it's a muddy road that was dark and wet and slippery with no lights. And it was not uncommon to see a rental car down in the ditch. But it got better because the second park is always going to be the better one because now you've got hotels and back of house and restaurants, and so you have more resources. And it's always the case. The second park is always going to be your easier one, but they're both fun.
It's interesting you bring up second park, because if we slide back to Florida for a moment, of course, second park built in Florida, was Epcot Center that opens October of 1982. At the time, it was the most ambitious thing the Walt Disney Company had ever tried. And you'd think, when you get that open, management, would take a moment to pat people on the back and tell them good work, and we really appreciate everything that you did. But as you shared when we were researching today's show, that's not what happened, was it?
Well, they did pat these people on the back, but they patted them on the back as they went to the airport because even though Epcot had been, quote unquote, air quotes, finished, there was that little park in Tokyo in Japan that was still yet to open. And so not every person, but many of the people who completed their work still dressed in their, boots, still had their hard hats under their arms, still had their protective coats, and they packed their suitcases, were shuffled off to the airport, boarded planes, and found themselves there in Tokyo Disneyland to complete that park, to get that one ready for opening.
I just without even a breather. Oh my God, I can't even.
Oh, come on. It's a 14-hour flight.
Holy.
That's got to count
your
for
time
something.
to rest, right?
Yeah. Sleep is overrated, Jim.
Okay, but speaking of going from stateside to work on one of the foreign Disney parks, I mean, you've done this 3 times now. You did Euro Disneyland. You were there for Walt Disney Studios Park in Paris, and more recently Shanghai. Were you fluent in French or Mandarin? And if not, how did you communicate with the workers there on site?
Well, you get really good at pantomime, and I was good at menu language. So, I would learn enough French, for example, or Mandarin or Putonghua, which was the local dialect for in China. But I'd be sitting there, and one time I was in a restaurant. And again, in China, if you go to a fresh fish restaurant. The fish are really fresh because I was shepherded in with a group, and I had my interpreter having me face an aquarium of live fish. And she said, "What would you like?" And I looked at the eel, I looked at the carp, I looked at the crabs, who were, by the way, you can always tell a live crab and a fresh crab that's freshly caught over one that's been in a tank over your lobster, restaurant that's been kind of in polluted water for a while, because the crabs that were freshly caught, I swear, they were jumping out of the tank saying, take me, take the guy next to me, eat the guy, get the other guy, take me, take me home. There's freedom.
Wow.
But I would just say to my interpreter, like, whatever you want. But one time I was sitting with one of my colleagues, and he was going down the menu list, and I said to him, "Oh, you don't want that." He said, "Why?" Well, how do you like, eel? And he went, "Ooh, no, I don't want the eel." And you learn, very much there are things you can eat, and there are things which there isn't enough red chili sauce on the planet in order to cover it up. But again, all good stuff. And again, if you ever want, Eric, the next time we're out together, I'll be your shepherd.
Oh, good. You'll keep me away from the eel and the squid and everything else.
Yeah. Yes. And the other parts, as they used to say, they would serve anything on a cow except the moo.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I just to sort of bring this full circle, at some point we'll join Mr. Shull at Napa Rose, and he'll help us navigate that. How about that?
I think I could find something I could eat there.
By the way, folks, if you've enjoyed the sorts of behind-the-scenes stories that Jim Shull shared just now, you really need to check out Disney Journey over on YouTube. This is where Jim posts new shows every Friday. They're all gems. You got to check them out. Likewise, if you enjoyed listening to Mr. Hersey, well, Eric and I post new episodes of our Epic Universal podcast every Tuesday, and we'll be continuing our feature series on the Universal Cabana Bay Beach Resort on that show tomorrow, in fact. And speaking of shows at the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network, well, folks, you asked for it, so we're bringing back Marvelous Disney. Now, of course, there is just no way we could ever replace the amazing Aaron Adams, which is why we decided to go in a whole different direction with this particular podcast. We're bringing in Dan Graney of Real Spoilers and Hubbubbery to serve as that show's new co-host. And Dan and I, with Eric's help, just recorded the inaugural episode of the reboot of Marvelous Disney, and I think you folks are really going to enjoy that show. But with that, I think it's time that we brought this week's edition of Disney Dish to a close. Again, I promise Mr. Testa will be back next week. But in the meantime, thanks to Jim Shull and Eric Hersey for filling in for Len while he's out there somewhere evading the authorities. Anyway, this podcast is produced spectacularly by David Gray and Eric Hersey, who will be manning the deep fryer this coming weekend at Hollis Hill Farms in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, as they churn out dozens upon dozens of apple cider donuts at this year's Apple Fest. And hey, be sure, save some of those for me, okay? For Mr. Tester, Mr. Shull, and Mr. Hersey, this is Jim Hill, and thanks again for listening to the Disney Dish, and we will be back soon.